Hi folks, Chris Mask from Eastlink Community TV's Off the Chip Wagon. Hopefully you and your family are doing well in these unique times, but a little bored, maybe looking for that kitchen project to kind of occupy your mind. Why not make your own pasta? I mean, pasta is a dish that's near and dear to the hearts and stomachs of thousands of cultures around the world. There's different ways to make it, different flours, different uses, different textures, different sizes, different all sorts of stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, this is an incredible rabbit hole to go down. But I'm going to give you the basics for making pasta at home. And where most people screw up, selecting the wrong flour. You need to look at something called the wheat protein content of your flour, because depending on what type of noodle you're making, that's going to make or break your recipe. For example, if you were making Chinese hand-pulled noodles, you would want to select a flour with a lower wheat protein content because it's going to give your dough more elasticity and allow you to hand-pull those noodles if you're making something like ramen. But because we're going to be focusing on more of an Italian style dough here, we want to have kind of a middle of the road wheat protein content in our flour, which is about 10 to 12% across the board. And you might think, well, I'm making dough, I can use pastry flour, right? No, wrong, you can't. The wheat protein content, not good. It's not going to turn out. There's going to be a lot of adjusting that you have to make along the way. Classically, I mean, you use conventional flours, right? What about cricket flour? Because in the culinary world, it's actually pretty proactive these days that people are stepping outside the box and using cricket flour because of its protein content to make pastas. And it's not as hard to source as you think. 80% of it is exported from Australia. So if you order it off the internet or poke around some of your specialty grocery stores, you should be able to find some cricket flour for your pasta. It's actually going to give it this rather unique, nutty, kind of popcorny taste. But once you select your flour and you're ready to rock and roll with it, this is the simplest ratio I can give you to nailing pasta dough every time. 1 egg to 3/4 of a cup of flour. Whatever flour you use, about 3/4 of a cup to every egg. And this will go if you're using duck eggs or another type of egg, just to add something a little bit different to your dough. Now, we want to ideally in an Italian world use semolina. And while this may look like cornmeal, it is not. You cannot substitute this for cornmeal. Semolina has to be used if you're doing the Italian way properly. Now, the 00 flour you might have left over from a couple of videos ago when we did pizza dough, that will make a lovely accompaniment to the semolina in the first recipe that I'm going to give you. But at the end of the day, what's the flour most of us have in our pantry? All-purpose flour. And I'll give you a second recipe involving that. And the ratios are going to stay about the same. We're going to use for this first recipe here 1 cup plus 2 tablespoons of our semolina flour. And then we want to add in about 7 tablespoons of our durum flour, our 00 flour. If you don't have that, this is where you can use some bread flour. But again, because of that wheat protein content, we got to adjust it a little bit. So you'd actually be subbing in about 1 cup and 3/4 of bread flour for that durum flour. From there, we want about 1 tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil to go into this. And then we turn to our eggs. 9 of them. You want to use 9 egg yolks. And finally, 3 tablespoons of liquid. And that could be water. But it could also be squid ink, it could be fruit puree, vegetable puree. The world is your oyster. If you want to get adventurous, try subbing it out, because it's just a little bit of moisture that's going in there. The rest of the moisture in your pasta is going to come from the boiling water or the sauce that you end up simmering it in. Once you put that all together, you're ready to rock and roll. But with the all-purpose flour, think of it as this: 4 eggs to 4 cups of flour. 4 and 4. Now don't put all the flour in at once. You want to just kind of add it in to make sure you get that right consistency. And that's where we get a cooking philosophy that I like to call Nona hands. And if you think about it, grandmothers in all cultures, they just have this knack for being able to off the cuff whip up cookies or, you know, make a pasta dough recipe without following a recipe so religiously and diligently. They just go by feel. And that's where Nona hands come in. Because you do this a few times, you'll know what your dough should be feeling like. Once then it's all done and you've put it through and rolled it out, you should be able to dry it out. And if you freeze it, it'll stay for about a month. But when you know it's right, this is the window technique. Remember this with our pizza dough? if you take a look, you can see the stripes through both the semolina and the all-purpose flour noodles. Got to look closely there. At the end of the day, you're going to have two completely different looking doughs, whether it's the semolina one or the all-purpose flour one, but it's still going to be an awesome dough, and it's scratch made. And I mean, another mistake you'll make when you're doing pasta at home like that is thinking of it as pasta and sauce. Well, that's not the case. You got to think of it more like a marriage, because the right pasta should complement the right sauce. And if something goes wrong, you end up with a broken marriage and a midlife crisis where you have to buy a Ferrari when you're 35 years old, maybe even 45. Who am I to judge? But remember, good recipes need good cooks, and this is a perfect time to get a little adventurous in the kitchen. Stay safe, everybody.